In this video, I'm going to be replacing the front brakes, rotors, and wheel bearings on my brother's 1998 I can't do it. Alright, before we get started, we're going to jack up the front end of the truck, put it on jack stands, get the wheels off, and then go after the brakes. I've never worked on anything other than GM products because that's all I've ever owned, but my brother got this truck on a really good deal and had quite a bit of work that needed to be done to it, and he asked me to help him out. The rash only lasted a couple of days anyway. We're going to get this caliper out. I need to remove these two caliper bolts. They're 13 millimeters. I'm going to use my breaker bar to get these off. We got a 13 millimeter socket and I've got a 17 millimeter wrench. There's a, it's kind of hard to describe, but there's something you need to put a wrench on this side that keeps the caliper still and the bolt, and 13 millimeter. Get that bolt out. Very rusty. This thing right here, it's the female end of this bolt sleeve for the caliper, so we got to get a 17 millimeter wrench on this thing and hold that still while we get the 13 millimeter wrench on the socket, because if we don't, this thing right here is going to start spinning. So this truck's been sitting for a while, so you probably don't even need to do this, but in our case it seems to be the only thing that's going to work.
I didn't let it sit this long. I bought it. I got a driveway and it's been sitting for a long time.
How long was it sitting?
I believe it was about 10 years.
Yipes.
Yeah, okay. Maybe a little longer.
Anyway, we're compressing the caliper. I pulled the cap off the brake reservoir to relieve any pressure. Just got to remember to put that back on when you're done. Let's see you go driving down the road with that thing off.
Yeah.
Won't get very far. Well, if the brakes don't stop you, something will. So that gets the piston compressed. Alright, so we've got the caliper connected to the upper control arm with a zip tie just to keep that out of the way. Yeah, you were needing brakes, dude.
Oh man. That explains the grinding noise.
Alright, with the pads out, we're ready to get this caliper bracket off, and there are two 15 millimeter bolts behind it. Alright, these are coming off with no problem. Alright, this Ford Ranger has the bearings inside of the rotor. This isn't one of those wheel hub assemblies that you just would bolt to the spindle. So in order to get this rotor off, we got to get this dust cap off the end of the rotor. We'll access the cotter pin and the axle nut. There we go.
Cotter pin, so once you pin that.
Okay, that comes off. You say that's a 24?
24.
Well, look there.
There's a bearing sitting right behind this washer, so pull the rotor out towards you and then sink it back in. That gives you the ability to grab the bearing. Now, if for whatever reason, if you were ever reusing those bearings, I would recommend that method so you don't pull it out and it drop onto a dirty floor. You don't want dirt in your...
So we're just setting this down on cardboard, some clean cardboard, so...
And once you take the rotor off, there's the assembly behind it that has the rear wheel bearing. There's a seal around this that's going to come off to replace that.
So we'll clean all this grease off and we'll re-grease it when we go to put it back on.
Alright, we are going to go ahead and replace the entire rotor. If you happen to be reusing your rotor and you want to redo the bearings, just make sure you clean out all the old grease. And on the back side of your rotor, you're going to have a seal. You need to remove this seal, pry it out to get out this inner wheel bearing. In this case, we're replacing the whole rotor. We're not going to mess with that. This is a rotor for the two-wheel drive 98 Ford Ranger. What's great about these rotors is that the race is already installed in the rotor. You'll notice a difference between my previous rotor and this one. This one had the option for the front ABS. Mine doesn't have it. It's not going to hurt anything to have that on there. We are going to install that outer wheel bearing when we install the rotor onto the spindle. So what we're going to do here is install the inner wheel bearing, part number set5 900SA. Got this from Rock Auto. We're just going to use the bearing to set in there, so you don't need that. I'm going to get some gloves on because we're going to pack this wheel bearing with some grease. I'm using Mobil 1 synthetic grease, and what we want to do is we want to pack that grease into all these little gaps here so that it's completely enclosed. Get you a wad, stick it on your palm, and just feed it in. It's really sticky. It's almost like peanut butter.
You want to put that on a sandwich?
So now I'm just going to go through and try to pack it in the front here. Feel pretty good about that being pretty packed in there. I'm going to take some grease. I'm going to start lubing up the race that's inside.
Don't get any grease on your rotor.
We do have brake clean in case we do, but save yourself the trouble. I'm also going to put a little bit around this border here because that's where our seal is going to go. All right, going to drop this in.
Tapered side down.
Again, the race is already installed. Go ahead and grab our wheel seal.
Part number 9150S.
I'm going to put some grease around this just to give it a little lubrication so that it'll drive down in there. What we're going to do is going to take a socket that matches the diameter of the seal, and we're going to try to drive it in. Cut.
All right, do-over.
Found a large socket that matches the diameter of the seal, and we're going to try to drive this in. It's wanting to go down one end, but not the other.
Pretty snug fit.
Yeah. Make sure you level everywhere.
It's flush.
Put some grease on the inside of that.
LM11949.
Again, we do not need the race. Set that aside. Try to pack that as full of grease as we can. We'll put some grease onto our spindle. Now that my outer wheel bearing is packed, I'm going to seat it into its race, and then we're going to put the retaining washer on, and then we're also going to put the nut back on. What we need to do is preload the bearing by setting it to 240 inch-pounds. And I'm going to spin as I'm tightening. Okay, now that it's hit that, I'm going to back it off a half turn and then go back line it up to where you can get the pin through. Now time to put the dust cap back on. Light taps from a hammer should get the job done.
So what you're saying is hit this with everything you got?
No.
Now we're putting the caliper bracket back on with these 15mm bolts.
Brake caliper mount to spindle is 85 foot-pounds. Gonna shoot some brake clean on here to get the rust inhibitor off.
I'm going to go ahead and compress the pistons. That way we can put our brand new pads on. They're awfully thick, so we need to make sure these pistons are compressed.
Going with QC 652 Wagner ceramic brake pads. Brake pads also came with new glides, so we're going to go ahead and replace those. Take advantage of the fresh, bright, clean parts from the box.
Alright, we got some brake lubricant. I always like to put on these contact surfaces with the brake pads. Put a little lube on there, that way your brakes don't squeak. Put some on the guides for the brake pads themselves.
Again, you don't want this on your rotors.
Yeah, don't put too much. You end up gooping it on your rotors. Alright, with the pads in, we can slide the caliper on and put our 13mm bolts back in.
Make sure we lined up.
Alright, I've got a 13mm socket on here. I'm going to do this torque down to, what do we say?
25 foot
25 foot-pounds. Okay, I'll do the same for up here. Dude,
We're done.
just got to put the wheel back on. We're done. Okay, I'm coming down.
That's where I bought that jack, and I thought, $5, I'll buy it. Well, I jacked it up, and it held. The boy soon you it started going down. Maybe just some seal in it.
Yeah. Well, with the truck back down on the ground, we torqued down the lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds apiece. We just tightened them in a crossing pattern. We did both sides of this truck, the front rotors, bearings, and pads, and we made sure to pump the brakes a few times since we had compressed the caliper pistons before we took this thing out on the road. Spent about $350 on parts plus taxes and shipping. I'll tell you what, I'm still paying for it with that rash. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. God bless. Be sure to hit that like switch on your way out.